people have a false mental model. People think entrepreneurs take risk. Entrepreneurs do not take risk. They do everything in their power to minimize risk. If you think about Buffett's pinball machine business, what was the risk those two 14-year-olds, Squanish 14-year-olds took? Nothing. Okay, it's $15 in a pinball machine, which they could use themselves.
Right. Worst case scenario.
$3 in parts. So the second pinball machine will only get bought when the first one's already producing cash. Right. And the third one after the second one. So basically, there's no risk, right?
Entrepreneurs are actually great risk reducers. They start with something that seems risky, but
so that's the other thing that is a commonality between entrepreneurs and value investors, which is why the same brain cells get used. Both are trying to minimize risk. We as value investors want to go low risk, high return. And great entrepreneurs, that's exactly what they're doing. They're going low risk, high return. Right. Nobody is doing high risk, high return. Probably around 1 million businesses, more than 1 million businesses a year get formed in the United States. Venture-backed businesses are much less than even 1% of that pie. So if there was no venture capital and no venture-backed businesses, it would make no difference to the landscape. Okay, we'd still have the 1 million businesses being formed. Venture-backed businesses are a different animal because they are high risk, high return, right? What the VC wants you to do, the VC's got 10 bets. He doesn't care whether your bet works or not. He just wants one of those 10 to work.
Yeah.
So he wants you to step on the gas as aggressively as possible. If you blow up, you blow up, right? When you're an entrepreneur who's not venture-backed, that is not how you go. You don't foot on the gas. Right. You're very careful about downside protection. So what happened
even
with
some of the big entrepreneurs, Richard Branson,
I
think people see him as this free, risk taker, reckless sort of guy. But you've pointed out that that's not true about Richard Branson in this case.
If you think about one of those stories I love about Branson is when he had the idea to start Virgin Atlantic airline, right? The minimum that you need to start transatlantic service is a Boeing 747. Okay? It's a couple of $100 million, right? And Branson got Virgin Atlantic off the ground with no money. So what he did is he calls directory assistants in the United States, asks for the number for Boeing. Okay? Gets the number for Boeing, calls the main switchboard and says, I'd like to lease a 747 that you guys might have hanging around that you're not using. They hang up on him.
Right.
Okay. He keeps calling them. And finally, the lady at switchboard says, let me transfer you to someone who can get rid of you properly. Right. So she transfers him to someone who's head of commercial sales. And so this guy tells him, listen, Mr. Branson, in every country, we have one customer. And you are not the customer. In the UK, it's British Airways. And so, therefore, there's nothing to talk about. So Richard tells him, listen, I agree with you, that's fine, but just humor me for a second. Do you have an old Boeing 747 lying around that you're not using? And he says, yeah, actually we do. And if one of your customers, like the one in the UK called you, like British Airways called you, and they wanted a plane, what would you lease it for? So he says, well, I really don't need to have this conversation, but we would lease it for about $200,000 a month. Okay, $200,000 or $300,000 a month. And Branson was able to convince Boeing to lease him that 747 because it was sitting and doing nothing. Then when he set up Virgin Atlantic, he said, you get paid for all the future flights in advance because people buy tickets. So the plane's going to fly in April. People already bought tickets in February.
Right.
So you say, I got cash coming in 2 months, 3 months before the plane's going to fly. And I'm going to pay for the fuel 30 days after that plane lands. Okay. So he had negative working capital and the lease payment is also in arrears, right?
Right.
So basically he was able to get Virgin Atlantic off the ground with zero equity, right? Now, the way I look at it is that if you can start an airline with no money, you can start any business with no money.
Right.
Okay. You just have to replace capital with creative thinking. Right. And so I think that when we look at the non-venture backed businesses, the Chinese restaurant, the laundromat, the pinball machine business, all of these, right? The common theme is that they really don't take risk. And they have upside. Even when, Michael Dell is here in Austin, when he was going to UT Austin as a freshman, his parents were driving him to UT Austin. He had 3 computers in the back seat. And he was, he was fiddling with computers and making them and selling them. And that's what he started doing in his dorm room. And we have now Dell computers, So that's just a story that got repeated over and over.